on it. It should be in your
chat.
If you click on chat, you'll see the list of topics. It started out, said phases and duration, design architecture and design decisions. We spent some time talking about what's called active Ethernet and another technology called PON, and there's pros and cons to each. We talked about easements and equipment shelters. So we talked about part of the city being aerial, meaning on telephone poles, versus the city that's underground utilities. Talked about that. We talked about dedicated versus shared connections. We didn't get into construction oversight and standards. I know Rob brought that up at one point in time. We talked about, and then one of the items that's not on here is just responsive competition. This would mean Comcast and CenturyLink. We talked a bit about content providers and what would attract them, and the more options for citizens, the better and more attractive this would be. That's what we did the last hour and a half. Council, where would you like to go? You want to entertain some specific questions, or do you want to go down our list here? Do we want to recap? It might be helpful if we recap the subscription versus utility model. I think I got some things clarified on that. Some pros and cons to each. There's some risks with the utility model. There's some risks with the subscription model. Financial risk, political risk, and other issues, technology related.
We also have Dave and Tyler walk through the public-private partnership proposal and kind of talk about it as well.
Okay, so we have a public-private partnership proposal from Strata. This review set.
I council the Dave and Tyler sent it to me. I've sent it to the council. Should have it.
Okay. So Dave and Tyler can go through their proposal. Ryan can share his screen here. Why don't we start with that?
My thought too is
Take notes as we go.
I would think many of the people who are listening would be really interested in the phases and the duration, and just wondering how this will go down and how it will affect them. So I think that would be an important thing to cover in this initial town hall meeting.
And I think Tyler and Dave, you probably talk on that. Do you want me to show the presentation and work from there? You want to talk about how would you like me to best facilitate your discussion?
That sounds great, Ryan. If you want to screen share and let everybody see that public-private partnership proposal, we can start there, and then if there's questions, you can stop us along the way at any point, interject questions, and I think what we'll attempt to do is not get too far into the weeds so that we don't monopolize all of your time. We'll hit the high points and then allow you guys to direct the conversation so that we're best utilizing your time. So since we talked last, we have provided a public-private partnership proposal to Providence City, which I believe Ryan's getting ready to pull up here.
Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it. And so, yeah, maybe Dave, do you want to just walk through the key components of what is represented here in this presentation? And then once again, any council members, please stop us at any point if you want further clarification.
Yeah, so appreciate the opportunity to go through this with you. If we go through it, the next page just basically is an introduction to Strata, who we are, our experience as a provider, to kind of provide that information to the city. And we can spend some time here if you'd like, or we can move past this. I don't want to spend a bunch of time talking about who we are unless that's something that you would really like us to spend time on, Ryan. I'm not sure
I guess we could ask, is the council comfortable with the background of our organization? Do you want us to spend a little bit more time there talking about who we are and what we represent as an organization?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I think a very brief overview for those in the community who are on, but I think the council's comfortable with who you are.
Okay, I'll keep it really brief. So Strata Networks, we are a telecommunications cooperative that's been in business for over 65 years. We're primarily serving the Uinta Basin in northeastern Utah, but we have operations that web out into several different surrounding states. We do obviously provide traditional telecommunication services like voice and internet and television. We also have our own independent wireless network. We work with all of the large cellular players and have quite a bit of experience there. We employ approximately 300 people, as is stated there, and we've been doing fiber for more than 2 decades. In fact, just recently passed our 9,000th location in the Uinta Basin and providing gigabit per second speeds on that network. So we do have a lot of experience. What's unique about Strata is we are a cooperative, a telecommunications cooperative, which means we're not, it basically means we're owned by the customers that we serve. We have a local board of directors that helps to govern and dictate our operations. And I think that's a unique attribute for us because it really connects us to the communities that we serve in a way that's different probably or unique and varies a little bit from a for-profit organization. So the profits of the organization are put back into the organization or shared with the member owners of the organization. It's listed there that we have a few unique attributes. Once again, we do have a 24/7, 365 network operations center in a couple of different locations. We can share, actually, if you want to see some videos and some media on that particular facility, you can see those on our website. We do also have a data center located in Vernal. It's a fantastic location in terms of, climate and natural disaster mitigation. It's one of those ideal locations. So it's well connected, and also, once again, a lot of media and videos available on our website if you want to go check those out. And then there's some other specific things there that we do that are unique, that could help with this process. We do also own a media and production services company, V6 Media, as well as a managed services company, Spectra Solutions, and they give us some expertise and some unique skill sets in those specific regards. So that's probably plenty there. I guess the core piece in that last paragraph is to just make sure we emphasize with the council and the public that building fiber networks is at the core of who we are. Those other things are layered on to help kind of focus and drive that strategy, but building fiber networks and providing broadband is who we are as an organization. So what you see here are just some points of reference that we were able to collect from public data and or Utopia surveys that have been done in the past to kind of lay the framework for remind the council as well as the public of what's already been measured within the city. And I don't think this needs to be repeated. It's there for both the public and the council to look at. Obviously, there's demand for broadband.
So I think moving on from the introduction, then this public-private partnership proposal.
There's a lot of P's.
A lot of P's there, but that we've provided. Our intention is to provide, as we've kind of looked at the state of Utah specifically, but other places as well. But we noticed that there's an opportunity for cities to potentially build fiber networks, but there's not a lot of folks that are helping the cities to own and be able to, and that therefore recognize the potential profitability of those networks for the city's benefit. And so what we're providing is an option as compared to other options that are available for a partnership where the city would be able to own its network. And in the event that the city is able to drive subscription beyond the minimum requirements to meet the financial performance requirements of the model, the city is able to recognize an upside, be able to capitalize on that and utilize those additional revenues for whatever the city's needs might be. The city could use that money to pay off debt, or to reduce its rates, to build, new roads, or whatever they want to do with that extra revenue. So it would be up to the city to choose what they want to do, rather than having that money flow back to an entity that is owning the network, and the city not being able to utilize that extra revenue. So that's what the model is focused at doing. Strata's role in this model is to provide a consultative service initially to help the city choose the model that's going to fit best for its residents, to adjust the inputs to the model, such as whether or not there's going to be a bond, whether or not what the term or length of that bond is, what the interest rates would be, what the service fees would be to the subscribers, inputs like that would be utilized, or those inputs then could be discussed in a consultative way with Strata in advance, and then Strata would move into an engineering and design phase where the project would be designed, and then move into a construction phase where the project would be built, and then move into a network operations phase where Strata would serve as a network operator with a predetermined fee that would be part of the monthly subscriber fee that the subscribers to the network would pay. And Strata would, as part of that, as that network operator, Strata would provide 24/7, 365 support to the customer, do network monitoring, would be responsible for maintenance and all those types of activities, work with the city on billing issues, taking care of the revenues coming in and out of the network, and the distribution of those. So there's, updating the equipment as it needs to be updated, replacing infrastructure that needs to be replaced as time goes on. All of those things is what the network operator's role would be, and that's what we're looking for there. And I don't.
Yeah, a key component of this, hopefully everybody's reading this as we're talking, but there's some key tenets to what this proposal represents. So as Dave mentioned, a fiber optic network that's owned by the city. And then you'll see within the proposal that there's a couple of different models for the city to consider. A utility model whereby every resident and commercial location in the city receives a fiber connection to the premise. And there's some benefits to that option. And there's obviously some pros and cons to both the utility model and the subscription model. We'll talk about those a little bit more. You can see what maybe those benefits to the utility model would be. Another key tenet to this proposal is that the network would be open access, meaning that we would attract multiple service providers on the network so that the consumer would have the ability to choose. That would be similar to a utopia scenario. The network would deliver gigabit per second speeds and could obviously scale up to 10 gigabits per second speeds to businesses and residential customers in the future if that was needed and wanted. Definitely we would consider the impacts and the planning necessary for 5G, which we know is coming, and we feel like it can be it can coexist and has to coexist with a ubiquitous fiber deployment in a community. Some might view 5G as a threat, and in some ways it possibly is, but 5G really can't exist without a very robust and dense fiber build within a community. So we'll help the city kind of navigate and discuss that, community Wi-Fi solutions in parks and anchor institutions, city metering, and then consideration of the Internet of Things and how that might play out with the city. We've placed in this proposal a model that would complete this in 3 years or less. That could obviously be discussed. I think that was I think that was the time frame that Utopia had modeled out for you earlier. And then, as Dave mentioned, hopefully a model that would provide an upside for the city to benefit from the ownership. Well, first of all, the taking of the risk of making the investment in the infrastructure, but then taking advantage of the profits that exist from the network. If you want to scroll down through, Ryan.
That page is just kind of public information stuff.
States what the PPP represents and how the city can consider it. So, table of contents, you can scroll through that. How much of this do you want to hit, Dave? Talks a little bit about the technology here.
Yeah. So I guess just kind of direct me, Ryan, if we get deeper into this than you want me to, but and the council. So this executive summary just kind of goes through a lot of what we just talked about, but one of the things that's mentioned in this first paragraph is the need for broadband has never been higher than it is right now. We've experienced throughout the entire world the need for social distancing during this pandemic that we've experienced, and the way to be able to work from remote locations. And so that first paragraph just talks about the general need to be able to do that, and future looking municipalities are considering how they're going to be positioned in the future to make sure that their residents can continue to connect. If they're not able to do so, residents may be forced to leave those cities and look elsewhere for places to live, where they can get the connections that they need to support their jobs and their livelihood. The the costs that we've included are reflective of an all fiber network, 100% fiber to every endpoint in the city. And we've selected top tier carrier class materials and networking components, even all the way down to choosing a high quality locate wire, which is kind of a funny thing to point out, but want to just help you to understand from our perspective the importance of choosing quality components throughout the entire process. An example of why that would be critical is once you pay for this infrastructure, you want to be sure that you can protect it. And when there's excavation projects or other things going on, being able to accurately locate the infrastructure is critical to being able to protect it once it's been put in the ground. And so we use high quality locate wire. There's actually a very big difference both in quality one versus an expensive one, and there's a big difference in price as well. So those are just some highlights of that executive summary. We've talked about the key points of the proposal, I think, pretty well. This particular page talks about the utility model, and it's just kind of a summary, and it's a little bit busy, but in the utility model, as Tyler outlined, in this model, every location in the city would get a fiber connection, and every location in the city would be assessed a nominal utility fee. In this case, the model that we've modeled here is a $10 fee per location, and that $10 fee gives everybody a basic internet service, and it's intended to be a service that allows people to check their email, do a little bit of web browsing, but it's not intended to be a service where people can, do all their gaming and video streaming and things like that. For those subscribers who want to take advantage of those types of connections, there's services that can be subscribed to for either 250 megs or 1,000 megs, gig, or what is commonly referred to as a gig, um, and then they can do all of those other things that they want to do with that connection as they subscribe to the network. Because of the infrastructure fee, the cost of the network is because we're having to take the service to every single location, the cost of the network is a little higher than it is on the subscriber model that we'll look at here in a minute. But if you look at the line that says minimum take rate for monthly bond payment, in order to meet the bond payment, because of receiving that $10 utility connection fee from every residence, the city would only need a 13.8% take rate on the higher tier services in order to pay its bond debts, to pay off its monthly payment. Whereas on the subscription model that we'll look at in a moment, that minimum take rate is more like 38%. So there's a lot more risk to the city of being able to pay its payment on the subscription model than on the utility model. But they both come with different risks and different benefits as well. So that's why we wanted to provide you with both options. So that kind of is a general outline of what would need to happen, in the utility model. If we can scroll down to the subscription model now,
I think a key point there too, we haven't mentioned, but that you probably saw it on the model, but the gigabit per second price in this model is $75 a month, which is comparable, very similar to what is being charged in a utopia model. And so once again, the financial inputs or the outputs that you're seeing are being derived from that $75 per month cost per gig.
Yeah, sorry, I appreciate that catch there, Tyler. So here's the opt-in or subscription-based model. And on this model, you can see the overall network cost is less because we're not having to build to every single, we're still building the network down every road and in front of every house and business in the city, but in this model, but we're not actually doing the service drops from the road into the homes themselves and doing the installations, except to the minimum take rate, which is that 37.81% or 1,014 subscribers in this case. So in order to make this model whole, we would need 1,014 residents to subscribe to the network, and the cost of the service drops for those 1,014 subscribers is included in the money that you see up above there, but the cost for the other 62% is not included. So as additional subscribers joined the network, we would have additional fees that would be assessed to the city as they would be adding infrastructure to their overall network system. So that's one of the downsides of the subscription model, is that you have crews there for an ongoing period of time to, back and forth, whenever a customer requires service or requests service, maybe for years and years doing that. Whereas with the utility model, that would all be done upfront as part of the initial project. But one of the nice things about the subscription-based model is that you're not paying for infrastructure for people that maybe don't want it, and those customers that don't choose to subscribe to the network don't have to pay that $10 fee like they do on the utility model. One of the other downsides, though, of the subscription model is that it doesn't provide that basic connection to every residence. So one of the nice things about the utility model is that you can, especially for folks that are maybe on a fixed income, it provides them with the opportunity to get a service for a very, very affordable rate that would allow them to be connected for email and baseline internet services. As Tyler mentioned on the previous model, the target monthly subscriber fee for a gig is $75. It's the same for both models. So that is kind of an overview of the subscription model. That's just a breakdown of the fee structure, which we've talked about. This just kind of shows Strata's role. So Providence City is the network owner, and the city residents report to them, and Providence City holds the bond. And then there's agreement between Providence City and Strata basically manages all of the rest of those portions of the project. So the intention is to, and not to sound cliche, but to give the city somewhat of an easy button where they can say, you know, Strata can come in and take care of all of this for us in a predetermined fee structure that we can see, and we can know what we're going to pay for all of this up front. Let's see. Trying to think of what else there is in here that we might want to talk about. We've talked a little bit about the network operations and management, which is, I think, yeah, this next page here. And you know,
Ryan, do you want to spend any time on the breakdown of those fees? The $75, for instance, the $75 fee, like what portion of that would go to the city in this model? What portion would go to Strata?
I think that's kind of up to the council if that's what they want, and let them direct that. We do have a couple of questions now that you finished your proposal. We'll catch up on the questions that we've received. One question is, what yearly downtimes do you experience in other locations?
Good question. As an, you know, in the other areas that we serve, we are actually the incumbent local exchange carrier, which basically means we are the certificated carrier for that area. And one of the requirements for that is that we have to have a 5 nines network availability and reliability, which basically means 99.999%. Anything below that has to be reported to the FCC, and we typically meet that 99.999%. I honestly can't remember a time when we have not. I don't know if that answers that question, but.
Okay. The next question, we do have a hand raised. I will get to that one. But the next question is the typical drop to each home underground or overhead?
Great question. In the model, from a cost perspective, that it is modeled as though we are going to do an underground drop to each home. The reason for that is because that's the most expensive way to do it. So we're trying to be conservative and make sure that the model covers the eventual cost there. However, if we're able to find legitimate and valid utilization of aerial plant to go into a home overhead on poles, we would consider doing that if the city wanted to consider doing that. And there could potentially be some cost savings to the city if they chose to do that. But there's some downside to that should be considered. One of those things is the network is more vulnerable in that scenario. And the other thing to consider is that there are pole attachment fees that have to be paid to the pole owner. And so if you're a network owner, in this situation would be the city would own the network, they would be subject to pole attachment fees that would need to be paid for each pole annually that they're connected to, assuming that the city doesn't own its own poles. In this case, it would be Rocky Mountain Power poles, most likely, maybe some other utilities.
Perfect. And Janelle has her hand raised, and so we'll turn it to her.
Okay.
I just wondered if you could say what the fee would be for adding subscribers down the line. Do you have an idea about what that might cost?
Yeah, no, sorry. And I don't think that is in there. You're right, Janelle. And so I can update that. What I have in here is in the model is a post-subscription cost of $1,000. That to me is worst case scenario. But that's the fee to come and hook those customers up later. Would be $1,000 per subscriber.
I think that's a potential lever that the council could consider. You know, that cost that could help you to potentially drive subscription, and you know that cost that we're stating or quoting to you as an operator, it could be, you know, the city could consider, you know, a slightly lesser fee or more fee, once again, to induce subscription potentially, right? You know, by stating if you sign up by a certain period, the installation will be included. And if after a certain period, then the installation cost might be $1,000 or $1,500 or 500 or whatever the city council wanted to do there.
As the network operator, that would be the number we would be charging to the city in this proposal, but the city is not necessarily required to charge that to the subscriber. They could choose to augment that or pay for it over time, you know, have the subscriber take service and pay that off over a 3-year period. I mean, there's lots of options of how the city could approach that $1,000. But that's kind of gives you an idea of what the network operator would charge to the city to get it built. Does that answer your question, Janelle?
Yes, thank you.
Ryan, we probably need to give the council a little explanation of why we're sitting in a truck. Yeah, just a really quick 30-second explanation. I apologize, but yeah, Dave and I are in Manila today, up in Daggett County. We just finished having a little celebration with the Utah Education and Telehealth Network. We've celebrated the completion of a 70-mile fiber build from Uena County, you know, the Vernal area, up across the Flaming Gorge, Dutch John area, and the dam to deliver gigabit per second services, a fiber network to both the elementary K-12 school in Dutch John, as well as the school here in Manila. So we didn't have time after that celebration to make it back home before we needed to jump on this call. So there's actually deer walking by us here while we're on the call and whatnot. So I apologize.
Well, I appreciate that. So thank you. Janelle, did you get all your questions answered?
Yes,
Okay. So I think Josh, you had your hand raised, but with
yeah,
if you're ready.
Brian, it was just a quick follow-up. I was curious whether or not, it sounds like we could do this, but if a new development's going in, if the city would assess impact fees or something to build out the infrastructure for fiber to an entirely new development, non-individual residents.
Ryan, are you wanting us to answer, or are you wanting to answer that one?
The developer would do that, or you would have that impact fee. We could do either direction, either requiring a developer like we do water and sewer, or charge an impact fee and put it in. Tyler, have you done any of those in other places?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it varies because some developments might be a 5-acre parcel and some of them might be 40, and so the costs go very significantly with that. Some of those developments might be along a road that already has infrastructure there, and we can just simply extend service drops into the new subscribers. So the costs vary a little bit, but we would definitely need to assess a fee, either as the network operator. If you wanted us to build into that, we would need to assess a fee to the city who would own the network for building or extending that network into the new subdivision. And we would work with the city to decide how we were going to do it. The way we typically do it in our areas that we currently serve is we go in joint trenches. We encourage the contractor that is doing the excavation work for the new development to dig a trench that accommodates joint trenching or joint utility utilization. And we'll go in with the power company, for example, and occupy opposite sides of a 2-foot wide trench, and put our infrastructure on one side and the power on the other. And that way, a lot of the costs are significantly reduced, because you're not, as the network owner, you're not having to pay for the actual excavation construction, which is a big part of the network cost. So the city could potentially require that of a new developer, or at least encourage it, and then charge a nominal fee on top of that if they wanted to, an impact fee or whatever, to pay for the network cost that was beyond whatever the cost of the excavation was. That's typically how we would do it today.
Well, thank you. Does that answer it, Josh? Okay. So I would open up as we get questions. Just a reminder that if you are interested as a resident, if you are interested in our technical advisory committee and would like to participate on that, whether you're listening live or later in the recording, we would invite you to contact the mayor or myself, and just kind of give that plug. So if there is residents that would like to participate on that, just contact either the mayor or I. We'll send that out in the newsletter as well. We do have another question. It is, do you anticipate most of the infrastructure will be installed via directional bore in the right of way? How do you install it? Maybe you can tell us, walk through kind of your methodology of installing. Maybe that would be helpful, keeping it on a generic overview.
You bet. So there's a lot of different methods that could be utilized, and I think in certain parts of the city, some of those methods are probably more appropriate than others. Some areas where you have a asphalt road, curb, gutter, sidewalk, and then someone's yard, then utilizing directional drilling or maybe micro trenching is the right choice in that area. In other areas, you might have a dirt field where you could utilize a direction or a vibratory plow and just plow that conduit in, and then do some restoration on the surface after you've gone through that area. So it just kind of depends on the the different terrain that you encounter and the topology that you're working on in the different sections of the city. This proposal that we have provided is assuming 100% micro trenching and directional drilling, because those are the methods that would kind of be our higher cost method, and assuming that we would have to do those in order to get around sidewalks and asphalt roads and things like that. But in the event that there's some plowing that could be done, that would save money in those areas. So we would definitely consider that. A lot of this also comes down to working with your city, your public works group, and trying to establish from a long-term perspective and from the city's perspective, where do you want the network to be? What's the easiest place for the city to have a network that they own, as far as being able to maintain it and protect it and know where it is and work around it with future projects and things like that. So a lot of those decisions get made a little further down the road. But right now in the model, we've assumed the costs of directional drilling and micro trenching in order to make sure that we provided a low impact solution to the city.
So just a clarification, you've talked about that you've projected this at a high cost, the highest cost. If the cost underruns, then that's to the benefit of the city. Is that correct?
Yes,
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So anytime we talk about you've projected the highest cost, worst case scenario, all of that benefits. If we can do that returns back to the city.
that's correct.
Yeah, our intent in modeling this is to really give you a number, a construction number that hopefully over time would come down, rather than with evolutions of conversations would go up. And so that's why you're hearing Dave express that we've tried to build the model with the highest cost inputs possible, to take a more conservative approach from Strata's perspective as well as for the city's perspective.
But yes, I mean, that's a critical thing to point out, because, you know, making it the most expensive possible and then just pocketing the difference if we get it done cheaper is not, that doesn't sound like that good of a deal for the city, and that's not the intent. So the intent would be, as we work with the city and determine, hey, in this area we could do this, it would be lower cost, or hey, there's this piece of infrastructure, we have an old sewer line that we're not using anymore, and we're going to use that to push conduit through, or whatever, you know. As we find opportunities to reduce the cost, those savings can be passed on to the city. So that's one of the other key differentiators with our proposal. It's a true partnership.
Josh, you have your hand raised. We'll go to you.
Yeah, I was wondering maybe the intent of the question and whether or not that got answered. And I thought maybe the purpose of the question was, you know, will this tear up my front yard is what came to mind. So I understand directional boring is very low impact. For those of us unfamiliar with micro trenching, which I admire because it kind of sounds like a marketing name, but tell me what micro trenching is. What does that consist of briefly?
Yeah, great question. So I want to be sure to point out that there is a significant difference between micro trenching and another type of construction called nano trenching. And they're often confused with each other or grouped together, but they are quite different. So for example, there's a Google Fiber project that was done in Louisville, Kentucky, that has been broadly publicized as for its failures. And that's a nano trenching project. So what we're talking about is different than that. In nano trenching, depths are typically like 3 to 4 inches, and then you just seal it with you put a conduit in there and then seal it with a rubber, like a tar seal. And what happens when that gets hot, there's nothing for that tar seal to adhere to. It pulls the conduit right up out of the ground as folks drive over it and destroys the infrastructure. So that's not what we're talking about. And the micro trenching that we're referring to is a process of trenching about 16 inches deep in the roadway and about 1.5 inches wide. And then that trench is vacuumed out with a high power vacuum that vacuums all of the spoils out as you're going along and leaves this clean, beautiful, clean trench as it goes along. And then you place your conduits in there and cover those conduits with flowable fill to the city's spec. And then that flowable fill is capped with a rubber or tar sealant just to protect it from erosion from water and things like that. What the industry is starting to recognize is that when roads are rebuilt, they typically go through one of 2 different processes. And Ryan can talk more about this based on his professional experience with Burdick Paving, Staker Parsons. But sometimes they'll just roto-mill up the asphalt and then repave. And other times they have to, fix the substrate levels of the road. And in that, and I'm not using the right term, and for some reason my mind went blank, and I apologize for all of you there.
Base and sub-base.
Yeah, your sub-base and road base, yeah. Sorry, I appreciate it, Ryan. Some reason I couldn't think of those. But as in that event, they'll typically excavate to depths that interfere with telecommunications regardless of the construction methodology. So like typically before we started doing microtrenching, our typical depths were like 30 to 42 inches. And we were finding that we were most often having to relocate that infrastructure for those types of road projects, even at those depths. And so if we're going to have to relocate it anyway, we just soon not have to dig so deep when we do the construction and have it be a little bit easier to find because of its depth. And so a lot of the industry is moving towards microtrenching. The manufacturers that are producing that equipment can't make it fast enough. The demand for it is so high right now.
So talk specifically about yards too.
And then, yeah, so that's the micro trenching process. And then what typically happens is as you enter the yard, there will be a pedestal, those little green boxes that you see on the side of the road that will be placed between every other home. So it'll serve 2 homes. Each pedestal would serve 2 homes. And from there out into the road, you use a missile, like a hammerhead missile that has air pressure hooked to it, and basically it's like a directional bore, but it's just you can't actually steer it like you can with a directional boring or drilling machine. And that just does that little piece under the sidewalk out to the road where the micro trench is. And then from the pedestal going into the home, it kind of depends, but we typically use a small directional drill to go from the pedestal up to a suitable place at the home. We typically coordinate that with the homeowner and then enter the home with a conduit that comes up the sidewall and goes into the home, and then the fiber optic line is ran to a location inside the home that the city resident that the homeowner is able to coordinate with us on. That's typically the way that the installation process goes.
Thank you. Josh, did that answer your question?
Oh, it was fascinating and very thorough. So sounds like my grass, my trees will stay intact.
Yep, so, all right, Blaine, you had your hand raised. You've lowered it. I'm going to turn on your talk to see if you have a question. Hold on just a sec. All right, Blaine, you'll have to unmute you if you want to talk at this point.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
I can.
So what I've wondered is avoiding sprinkler systems. Do the boars run into sprinkler lines?
To say no would be untrue. We typically we're at depths that are beneath the sprinkler lines, but
Okay.
it does happen. And typically, as we work with the homeowner, if they don't know where those are, we'll ask them to cycle the sprinklers while we're there and make sure that everything is working. And if there's a damage that's taken place, we'll repair it while we're there doing that work. One of the challenges of that is if you're there off season. So if you're there in late fall, winter, or early spring when they can't do that, then we'll have to work with them to come back at a time when they can cycle through that. But typically we're at depths where it's not an issue, but it will happen. There will be some homes that have some sprinkler damage and things like that need to be repaired. And our commitment is to make sure that we work with the city and its residents to make sure that we get those taken care of to the satisfaction of the homeowner.
Okay.
Anything else, Blaine?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions or comments? Any other things from the council that you'd like to have discussed from either Tyler or as a group? All right, seeing none, I turn it back to you, Mayor.
I have a question, kind of a fundamental question. I think the council will be interested in. So we're at the point, this goes back to how does this whole process work? What are the phases and what are the steps? So we sign a contract with Strata, what happens next?
Yeah, so the first thing we would need to do is negotiate the final agreement which basically dictates the way that the money is going to be distributed, who's going to collect it, how it's going to be distributed back and forth. It would dictate the terms of the construction based on, how many months it was going to take. So for example, the city might say, we want this to be done in 12 months. And Strata's response might be, well, our proposal was to have it done in 3 years or less, but we're happy to do it in 12 months, but the cost may go up a little. And so we could have some of that negotiation back and forth to try to meet the city's needs and their expectations for the network. Once we get those pieces done, the design process will start, and simultaneous to that, we'll start working on rights of way for potential huts or shelters where we can place equipment. Tyler keeps reminding me that hut is not a very elegant word, so I need to call it a shelter. So we'll start working on, placement like that, how we're going to break up the city and where we would place those facilities, start working on those in case we need to get private easement or whatever. And then we would move forward with, once the design work was done, we'd move forward with construction of the network. And obviously we would have to work with the city to make sure that we accommodated what other projects you have going on. You might have road projects or other infrastructure projects that you're doing. We don't want to be on top of those and causing problems. But there might also be opportunities where you might say, hey, there's a road that's being done. Let's go get the infrastructure put in there now while that road is getting torn up, rather than doing it later. And so the coordination with the city on the construction side. And then once the network is built, we would move right into the network operation phase and operating the network for the customer. Does that answer your question, Mayor, or are there some more specifics that I could answer there?
I have some follow-up questions. So is it advisable? Doesn't make sense. I'm thinking revenue-wise, construction-wise, to do this in phases in the city, at least the construction component. Is there any interest in, for example, perhaps connecting the commercial part of the city, which doesn't mean necessarily just retail, first? From a revenue standpoint, maybe those are the higher drawing revenue streams. I don't know. And then we talked about the aerial, where it might be advisable to, instead of micro trenching and everything else, boring, we would string existing areas of the city that's got telephone poles. I don't know. Is this done in phases or?
Yeah. So there's actually a couple ways we could approach that, Mayor. We can leverage some tools that we have at our disposal that could actually, once the design of the network is created, we would basically have zones within the city. We could engage the residents in that process and basically attempt to build the city or build the zones in a way that is delivering the service to the zones that have the highest potential take rate first, to drive that revenue first, or put the revenue, or increase the revenue up front. And obviously that level of transparency would be great to have for us and for the city, because we're delivering the service to those areas that want it, in terms of, the most interest. You're delivering it to them first, and then maybe it also drives engagement if you have sign up periods and people are kind of feeling a sense of urgency to get signed up and get committed to the service. And I think that could help. And also obviously targeting commercial areas, enterprise areas would be wise.
Yeah, and we would, just as a follow-up there, I think this is assumed based on your question and Tyler's response, but we would expect that we would start collecting revenue before the last customer is turned on. So as soon as phase one gets done, whichever phase we choose to be that first zone, we'll start hooking up customers and collecting revenue, and then move on to the next one and to the next one, to the next one. So that the city's able to collect revenue while the network is being built, not having to just wait until the end and then say, okay, let's flip the switch and start taking service.
Yeah, in the models that we've worked in certain scenarios, if you're looking at a 2-year build, we've looked at some assumptions where in 60 to 90 days into that 2-year period, you're already starting to collect revenue on 5 to 10% of your residents, right? So you're starting to pull down that revenue up front and help pay for the investment.
One of the things that really helps with it helps to reduce the deferred interest that you would have on the bond. So during the 2 years, you may choose as a city to do a deferred, and it would probably be recommended that you do a deferred interest, where you don't actually have to make any payments on your bond until the network construction is complete. But during that time, you're accruing interest. There's deferred interest that's being accrued, and so it adds to the overall debt of for the city. And so if we can start collecting revenues to offset some of that deferred interest, it provides a big value for the city during that construction phase.
Well, Dave, we got a question that says, does Strata use their own engineers or hire outside civil engineers?
Great question. We typically use in-house engineers. We have licensed professional engineers in-house. But we do use at times when demand gets too high for us to keep up with, we will outsource to outside firms. So depending on, when the city made their decision and how it fit in with other projects that we have, we may need to do that or we may not. It just kind of depends on the timing and what other things we have going.
And a follow-up, if one of the council members wants their area done first, it's a matter of signing up the most number of people around them, right?
Yeah, that we just need good ambassadors. We need really good
Have
champions.
the most number of signups.
Yeah.
If they take it around and they can sign up the most number, then that's where we build first.
Yeah, and truthfully, Ryan, we're smiling, but that is the way that the process works. So the tool that we use allows for what Tyler just referred to as a champion or multiple champions in a zone to go around and build excitement for it in their zone and get people to pre-subscribe to the network, which then drives that zone to get service faster than another. And to be, to just kind of point out, that's an option. If the city wanted to just say, we want it to go like this, and this, that would be fine too. But it's an option that if the city wanted to utilize customer demand to drive which areas got built first, that's a tool that we have available to us that we could utilize to provide that type of construction scheduling for the city. But if the city just said, well, we see the zones, thanks for showing us the zones, we want you to do zone 3 first and then zone 6 and whatever, we'd be happy to do it, however the city felt they wanted to do it.
Okay.
Does this proposal that we've heard about and looked at include oversight inspectors and technicians, repair technicians, on-call service? There's a lot of the quirks when it comes to the maintenance and the ongoing installations, and I'm not sure how your proposal takes into account for all of that.
Yes, all of that is included in the proposal. All of the inspection during construction is included in the cost. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat here. And then all of the ongoing maintenance of the network and all of that is included as well. The one thing that we may want to look at, Rob, is whether the city would like to locate its own infrastructure when there's a blue stakes call, for example. If the city is going to be there anyway, there's a potential that we could provide some incentive to the city to do that rather than having us dispatch somebody or have a contracted entity to do the locates. But if you're hiring a contract entity anyway, then we would just do that, and that fee is included in the structure as it currently is.
The fee is included to outsource it to like a
Yes.
stake center type entity.
Yeah.
And typically, this goes out to a bid, like an RFP kind of thing that you mentioned earlier. And that contractor, whether it be one of numerous different underground boring type companies, typically, and yeah, there's other other processes out there, but typically these are getting installed from the underground directional bore machines, and the oversight. I've heard over and time again that the oversight is going to be there, or it should be there, but in reality, it's not there that often. And these bore companies are putting in this infrastructure at 0 to 13 feet deep. And so it's upside down rainbows all over towns. And every town is very, very frustrated with that. And so I'm just curious as to how we can try to figure out this placement and the engineering to not have our infrastructure be at so many different depths and bad locations.
Oh yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think as a you know, if we were to move forward together, that would be one of the specifications for the network design that would have to be clearly outlined. And one of the things there on the inspector's point of it, you know, if Rob, if you or the city wanted to utilize a third-party inspector or yourselves in order to ensure the quality of the network, we would be happy for you to do that. But we will be providing that oversight. But whether or not it meets your, you know, your level of critique is something that we would have to evaluate. One thing I will say is we've hired a lot of contractors over the years. And the reason we now do everything in-house is because the quality that we expect, we were struggling to get it with contractors. And so the quality of work that we do is very high for our crews.
At that point, would you hire outside boring or any of the others, or you do from top to bottom, Strata would do it all, or do you have subcontractors that would be doing any piece of it?
There could be subcontracted employees, and there, you know, I certainly wouldn't say that's not a possibility. Again, kind of depending on when it happened and how it lined out with other projects that we have scheduled in the queue. But our intention is for Strata to have its own staff up there doing construction management, monitoring the project, and staffing the project. But we may need to augment that staff with folks if we don't, you know, especially if we want to accelerate the build schedule. So I don't mean to be vague in my answer, but it kind of depends on a few factors.
All right. I don't have any other questions coming, so back to you, Mayor.
Still some follow-up questions. If I'm a customer or city resident, I'm going to say these guys are from another part of the state. What about response time if I've got a network connection problem? Will there be local service people here that can respond to a service call?
Yes.
Okay. Just, we've got two ways to go. We were talking about new development. We can do two things. We can assess an impact fee, or we can require a developer put in infrastructure. Which would you recommend we do? The impact fee might, to me, make sense, because then we call up Strata and say, we've got new development, work with a developer, because then you're putting in the same equipment and everything else that the rest of the city is built out. Or would we tell the developer, here are the standards, here's the equipment we are requiring you to install. So we pick one, we draft an ordinance that says impact fee, or we say the developer has to install the infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, my recommendation would be the former, just for the consistency of the network.
Impact fee.
But if the city chose that they wanted to do the latter, we would work with you on that.
We have a sister city that is doing some major infrastructure work right now. They're putting in sewer lines. They're currently on septic tank system, and they are forward thinking, and they're putting conduit in the ground for fiber. we share a common boundary. It's Millville to the south of us. I don't know where they're at. I'll have to talk to their mayor and council as far as taking this to the next step. If we brought them on board, is there any cost savings for the city? Obviously, from your perspective, as far as mobilization, it makes a whole lot more sense. And to take it a step further, we were talking about what part of the city gets built out first, the one that has the most subscribers. It might behoove us to pitch this and sell it to other cities here in Cache Valley as well.
Okay.
I see the smile on your face, Dave.
Yeah, I assumed you were going to say, well, we're a little bigger than Millville, so we got to get done first.
Well, we're first in line, so.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let Tyler answer that question.
Yeah, no, I think we would be definitely open to that discussion. We would obviously love to work with multiple municipalities that are bordering cities and have common interests, and surely as long as everybody's interests are aligned and we can manage the projects in a way where they're similar rather than have vast differences, it's going to be beneficial for everyone. So yes, I would think that that's something we would definitely want to explore further if you think there's potential there.
It's not currently in the model, but it's something that we could discuss further if you wanted us to, Mayor.
Questions on your proposal? Who would I talk to, Dave or Tyler?
What's that, Mayor? Sorry.
Questions on the proposal here, if I have any.
You can contact either one of us, but
either one of us. Yeah.
Okay.
Whichever guy you think
Whoever answers the phone
is the easiest one to talk to. You know?
Whichever one's better looking.
Oh, yeah,
well, and that's gonna be it.
Stronger. All right.
Please don't take a poll. My pride can't take it. Right? Please no polls.
I won't. We have a question. Is Strata in Logan or adjacent cities, or is planning to be in adjacent cities? I think we've covered some of that, but just because of that specific question, maybe you can answer if there's anything more you'd like to add for that question.
Yeah, there's probably a couple different things that could be implied by the question, so I'll try to answer both of those. As far as from a staffing perspective, do we have an office there? Or we talked about that. We would, in the event that we were successful in establishing this partnership, we would have local people there to work on and maintain the network in Cache Valley. In regards to whether or not we have network infrastructure there, we currently do not, but we have a couple of options there that I'm happy to discuss here. The first one is that Strata has a significant amount of credit with the Utah Department of Transportation for the utilization of existing conduits and fiber network that the state has. And we've evaluated those and find that they would be sufficient for us to be able to utilize to get to the area, utilizing the credits that we have already. The second thing is that we've also reached out and spoken to other long haul carriers that have infrastructure in Cache Valley, and we've established that we would be able to get service from those as well if we chose to do that, and potentially even provide multiple points of transport in and out of Cache Valley in order to provide redundancy and route diversity. So I'm not sure which of those two things, or if maybe it was something entirely different, but I'm not sure if that covers the intent of the question. Or if there's more, I'd be happy to focus in on another aspect of it if I'm not answering it to satisfaction.
Well, we appreciate it. We'll let them ask if they have more. They can type it in and ask, and we'll address it as we go. Anyway, I don't have any other ones, Mayor, back to you.
Sure, I'll have some more questions. I took a lot of notes. But for tonight, I think we've gone as far as we can go. I know the council's probably wondering, are we going to have another public workshop? And my inclination is at some point in time, yes, we will. I think we'll get to some decision points that probably would make sense.
I would ask anybody that's either listening or watches the recording that in order to ask future questions, please email them to either myself, the city manager, or the mayor. And you can get our information either from our website or from the newsletter, I think has information on it. Call the city. There's lots of ways. We're happy to take those questions. We can compile those and work with the council through a future meeting, or we can try to answer those individually. So anyway, we appreciate all of the input and all of the questions. So
one thing to segue on from where Ryan brought up, some of these questions, I'm sure that once residents realize the direction we're going, are going to be common concerns and questions. And as I've started to do when we've had questions from residents about various topics, I put those in the newsletter. And I've actually had some people say I appreciate that because they had similar questions and they didn't know how to reach out to us. So I will certainly intend to do that. For example, the gentleman asked about sprinkler lines and there's a discussion that went on about trenching and how's it going to disturb my grass in my yard and all that stuff. So. All righty.
close up and
Yeah, as has already been stated, we welcome any individual, you can contact us individually with questions in the interim, and we'd be happy to address any questions that come up. So let us know. I believe both of our contact numbers and information is in that proposal, so feel free to reach out at any point. We're here to help and consult as best we can. So
Well, have a good evening all. And for those who still have to commute home, have a safe drive. Thanks, Tyler and Dave.
have a great night.
Thank you
Right.
for inviting us.